I knew the truth would burn this town faster than any fire Cain ever set. I just didn't know I'd be the one holding the match. They saw Jonah Carrow step out of the courthouse with the woman and her child beside him, snow clinging to their coats like ashes from an old sin returning to life. Folks whispered that no decent rancher would stand with a scarred woman branded by another man's greed. But Jonah didn't flinch. He looked straight at the wound the whole valley pretended didn't exist. And that was the moment everything began to crack. By sundown, half the town would choose a side. By sunrise, someone would bleed for it. And before the week ended, the judge would swear he never touched the deed Jonah carried, even though his signature was right there on it. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. Stay with this tale till the last breath, and don't forget to subscribe for more Western stories. He wasn't planning to open the gate for anyone that morning. The sun had barely cleared the ridge, and the heat already carried the smell of iron and dead grass, signs a rancher learned not to ignore. Carrow Ranch had made it through hard winters and lean summers, but this drought, this one felt personal. Dust swirled far down the road, not the lazy kind, the kind stirred by feet that were running out of road. Jonah Carrow wiped his brow with the back of his hand, the leather stiff with old sweat, and kept watching. A woman came into view first, thin, shoulders set like she'd forgotten how to bend. Beside her trudged a child, no more than 10, holding the reins of a limping horse whose front leg dragged like regret. They didn't slow, didn't wave, didn't plead. When they finally reached the wooden archway of Carrow Ranch, the woman stopped just shy of the gate's shadow. Dust coated her throat, her sleeves, the hem of a shirt too big for her frame. The child stood close, eyes dark, steady, already calculating which way to run if the answer turned bad. The woman spoke first. "Sir, I'm looking for work. Half pay. The horse needs feed. The child needs a place to sleep." Jonah didn't answer right away. The December light was sharp. Christmas a week away, though the land held no softness of the season. Only the wind carried scripture this time of year, and even that felt brittle. Truth is, I once thought the Lord stopped sending strangers to my door. He stepped closer. Not much, just a foot or two, but enough for the woman to stiffen. The horse snorted. The child's grip tightened. A gust of wind pulled the woman's collar aside. Jonah saw it, a pale ridge of scar tissue winding down the curve of her neck and disappearing beneath the shirt's frayed edge. Not a ranch injury. Not a wild horse accident. No, this was the kind of mark a man earned only through cruelty. The kind polite folks in town pretended didn't exist. The woman reacted fast. Her hand shot up, covering the scar, the way someone shields a flame from dying. "Don't look there," she said quietly. But Jonah didn't look away. He held his gaze, not hungry, not pitying, just steady. The way a man looks at something true, even when truth hurts. Something flickered across her face. A warning, a plea, a memory. He couldn't tell. Behind him, Caleb, his foreman, shouted from the well, "Boss, you gonna let every wanderer walk in now?" Jonah didn't turn. He reached his hand to the gate latch, thumb pressing against the old iron, warm from the sun. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "you asked for work, not charity. A ranch can respect that." He pushed the gate open. The child exhaled for the first time in a long moment. The woman didn't move at first, as if she feared the ground itself might betray her. Then she nodded once, sharp, disciplined, and led the horse through. The ranch swallowed their footsteps, holding them in the brittle quiet of late morning. Jonah walked beside them, catching the child's wary glance. A red cloth tied to the child's wrist fluttered, faded, but not forgotten. He wondered what grave it came from, but didn't ask. Caleb stomped over, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Boss, you know what Town'll say?" Jonah shrugged. "Town's been talking since Easter. Let 'em." The woman looked around the yard, corrals half empty, windmill creaking, troughs low. She read it the way a seasoned rider reads a trail. Nothing here was easy, nothing certain. The horse limped again. The child murmured to it in Spanish, soft as prayer. Jonah gestured toward the shade near the barn. "Water's low, but there's some left. What's your name, ma'am?" She hesitated. "Call me Vega," she said at last. "And this is Rosa." The girl didn't speak, only dipped her chin. Jonah nodded once. Names meant trust. He filed that away like a man collecting rainwater. They reached the barn. Jonah opened the stall with a slow creak. The horse balked, head tossing, eyes white with pain. Vega laid a hand on its jaw. "Easy, Lirio," she whispered. "We made it." Jonah watched her, watched the set of her shoulders, the way she never placed her back toward an open doorway, the way her eyes tracked every sound as if danger traveled by echo. He didn't know her story, but he knew a soul that had been burned and not broken. I know the look, because once I wore it too. Overhead, the church bell from Canyon Mesa carried faint across the dry wind, a reminder that Christmas was coming, that the Lord still watched the weak wander the desert, still waited to see who would open their gates. Jonah cleared his throat. "All right, ma'am. You'll start with the horses. Caleb will show you where to bed down." Caleb grumbled, but nodded. Vega faced Jonah one last time. "Thank you, sir." He shook his head. "Don't thank me yet." Because before the week was over, the town would have something to say about the rancher who couldn't stop staring at what everyone else pretended wasn't there. Morning came hard and colorless, the kind of morning that tasted like metal on the tongue, too dry for comfort, too quiet for luck. Jonah stepped out of the ranch house, boots sinking into dust that should have been snow this close to Christmas. The Lord had his reasons, but this land hadn't felt blessed in a long while. Across the yard, the woman, Vega, was already awake. So was the child. Kids shouldn't rise before dawn unless life has taught them it's safer that way. Jonah watched as Vega checked the lame horse's leg, hands steady, jaw set. She didn't speak to the animal the way most trainers did. No whistles, no clucking, just a hum, low, almost prayerful. The horse calmed under her touch. Truth is, some people carry a kind of silence heavier than noise. A shout cracked the morning stillness. "Boss!" Caleb waved from the corral. "Thunder's gone mean again. Nearly killed Olin." Jonah walked over. Thunder, a big coal-black gelding worth more than half the winter feed, charged the fence rails, eyes wild, ears pinned back. Dust rose in violent bursts around him. The other ranch hands kept their distance, nursing bruises and pride. Jonah was about to climb in himself when Vega appeared at his elbow. "Sir," she said, "let me." Caleb barked a laugh. "Ma'am, that horse'll send you flying straight to the Lord." Vega didn't blink. I wasn't asking permission. Jonah looked at Thunder, then at her. "Gate's yours, ma'am." She stepped inside the corral with no saddle, no whip, just a rope looped around her hand. Thunder snorted, struck the dirt, and came at her in a storm of hooves. The ranch hands cursed under their breath. Rosa's fingers curled around the fence rail until her knuckles whitened. But Vega, she didn't flinch. She didn't square her shoulders like a fighter or crouch like a coward. She simply moved, slow, deliberate, one foot sliding into the dust as if tracing a circle only she could see. Thunder feinted left. Vega stepped right. He lunged. She pivoted. Dust curled around them like smoke rising from old sins. Jonah leaned on the rail, eyes narrowing. He'd seen horsemen all his life. Good ones, brave ones, stupid ones. But never someone who treated a wild horse like a wounded memory rather than a threat. Thing is, horses know a survivor when they see one. Thunder reared, hooves cutting through the cold morning light. Vega didn't retreat. She reached out, palms open, and touched his neck. Just barely, just enough. Her voice dropped into that same hum she'd used with the lame horse. A sound that didn't belong to English or Spanish. Something older. Something a person learns only after they've buried someone who didn't deserve to die. Thunder shuddered. Not a big shudder. Just the kind that says, I remember this language. Vega slid a hand up his mane, found the rhythm of his breath, and in one fluid motion swung herself onto his. Back, bareback, no bridle, holding nothing but trust and a rope she didn't even tighten. The corral went still. Even the wind paused to watch. Thunder trotted once, twice, then lowered his head in a gesture Jonah hadn't seen in months. A surrender, a question, maybe a kind of apology, if horses had those. Caleb spat into the dirt. Well, ain't that something? Jonah didn't answer. His eyes were on Vega, on the way she slid off Thunder's back and touched his nose like she was touching a scar on her own skin. I know, she whispered to the horse. I know what was done to you. Rosa climbed the fence and ran to her mother. Vega caught her without looking away from Thunder. Jonah stepped closer. You said you wanted half wages? Yes, sir. You'll get full. You saved me $1,000 in one morning. Vega stiffened, not from pride, but from caution. Compliments had not been kind to her in whatever life she'd lived before. Caleb muttered, Boss, you sure about this? Town don't take kindly to... Jonah cut him off with a look. Town doesn't pay our feed. Town doesn't fix our fences. Town doesn't get a say. Vega lowered her eyes, not submissive, just tired. The kind of tired a person carries when they haven't slept safely in years. Jonah recognized it. I carried that same tired the winter I buried my wife. He cleared his throat. Ma'am, you'll take charge of Thunder from now on, and anything with hooves. Vega froze. Caleb swore under his breath. The ranch hands exchanged looks. The child Rosa stared at Jonah as though she couldn't decide whether he was a danger or a miracle. Jonah tipped his hat. Welcome to Carrow Ranch. A church bell rang from Canyon Mesa, thin, distant, echoing across the valley like a warning from heaven itself. Before the week was out, that bell would toll for more than worship. It would mark the first spark of the fury waiting to swallow them whole. The wind died before noon. Not the gentle kind of dying. The kind that makes the birds go silent and the cattle lift their heads as if waiting for a verdict. Jonah felt it first, an unease rolling across the back pasture like a sermon half-spoken. He and Vega had ridden out to check the north windmill, Rosa trailing behind on the slow, lame gelding. The air tasted wrong, still, heavy, dead. Sir, Vega murmured, eyes narrowing at the horizon. We should turn back. Jonah followed her gaze. A wall of brown-gray cloud swelled like a beast rising from the desert floor, miles wide, miles high. A dust storm, the kind that swallowed fences, the kind that ate cattle alive. "Ride!" Jonah barked. They pushed hard, too hard for Rosa's horse. The gelding faltered. Vega swung down, hauled the child off, and slapped the animal's flank. It vanished into the growing dark behind them. The storm hit the next second. Sand struck like needles. The world shrank to a violent roar and a colorless blur. Jonah grabbed Rosa with one hand, Vega's coat with the other, pulling them forward through the slicing wind. Thing is, storms don't chase people. They consume them. "Line shack!" Jonah shouted. 50 yards! If heaven heard him, it answered. The outline of the shack rose out of the storm, a crooked hut clinging to life the way dying men cling to scripture. They slammed the door shut behind them. Silence didn't come, only muffled fury. The shack shook under the assault. Dust seeped through cracks, soft as breath. The place held one cot, one blanket, a rusted stove that hadn't seen fire since last winter. Cold bit through the boards like teeth. Rosa curled up against the wall, coughing sand. Vega pulled off her coat, draped it around the child, then stood there, just stood, like a soldier not yet allowed to sit after battle. Jonah knelt by the stove, struck a match. The flame sputtered, died, returned, wavered like faith on a bad night. Vega's voice cut through the storm's howl. "Sir, you need to get under the blanket. You're shivering." "I'm fine," he muttered. "You're not," she said. "And if you freeze, who's going to get us home?" Jonah didn't argue, not because she was right, though she was, but because the storm outside had stripped all pride from him. He sat on the cot. Vega hesitated, then joined him, careful not to crowd. The blanket barely covered 2 shoulders. Rosa slept, soft breaths mixing with the sand's hiss. The storm raged. Heat grew only where their bodies touched. Shoulders, elbows, a shared line of warmth in a frozen world. Vega's hand brushed his ribs, light as prayer. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. Her breath trembled once, twice before she leaned closer. The storm's roar hid everything but the thud of her pulse through the blanket. Jonah felt her lips graze his jaw, soft, hesitant, a question without words. The room tilted. The storm vanished. There was only her. "I haven't been touched like that since the night before my wife died." Jonah's hand lifted. Reflex, instinct, hunger, grief, he didn't know which. It found her wrist, but it closed around it gently and stopped. "Ma'am," he whispered, voice raw. "Not like this." Her breath caught, a small movement, hurt or shame, he couldn't tell. She pulled back an inch. He didn't let go. "Not tonight," he said. "Not when you're cold and scared and tired." His voice nearly broke on that last word. Vega stared at him. No anger, no plea. Just a kind of wounded understanding only people with scars recognize in each other. Outside, the storm clawed at the world. Inside, Jonah exhaled the breath he'd been holding since winter 3 years ago. Vega shifted to sit beside him, not touching, but close enough that their shoulders brushed every time the shack shuddered. Minutes passed. Hours, maybe. Faith only knows. When Rosa whimpered in her sleep, Vega rose, tucked the blanket around the child, then returned to the cot. She didn't try to lie beside Jonah again. She sat with her back against the wall, shotgun across her knees, eyes open, protecting him, protecting Rosa, protecting the thin thread of trust neither of them dared name. Jonah watched her through half-closed eyes until exhaustion pulled him under. Before the night ended, the storm would break, but something else, something quieter, would take its place. And the rancher who wouldn't cross a woman's weakest moment would soon face a town that accused him of crossing every line that mattered. The storm left a film of red dust over everything: fences, roofs, even the morning sky. Christmas hymns drifted from Canyon Mesa's little church as Jonah hitched the wagon. They sounded thin, tired, like faith sung through cracked lips. Vega climbed up beside him with a list in her hand. Rosa sat in the back, wrapped in a blanket that still carried the storm's cold in its fibers. They rode in silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, the kind people share when they've survived something together. Truth is, storms make families out of strangers faster than blood does. Canyon Mesa looked smaller than usual. Folks had come out early for the holiday markets. Pine garlands hung from porch posts. Red ribbons fluttered in the wind. The whole place looked festive until the wagon rolled in. Then eyes followed them. Hard eyes, weighing eyes. A woman pulling a child and a horse from the edge of a ranch was nobody's business, but a woman riding with Jonah Carrow. That was every gossip's Christmas wish. They stopped at Gable's general store. Vega hopped down first, helped Rosa to the ground, then squared her shoulders like she was stepping into a battlefield. Inside, the bell rang, sharp. Gable barely glanced up. "Morning," Jonah said. Gable grunted. "We're low on stock." "We called ahead. Still low." Vega placed the list on the counter along with neatly folded bills. "We only need flour, nails, lamp oil." Gable didn't look at the list. Didn't look at her. Just kept rearranging the same jar of peppermints as if touching it more would clean the room of her presence. Rosa shifted closer to her mother. Jonah's jaw tightened. Then Deputy Harlan Pike swaggered in, spurs jangling like bells on a sinner's hymn. "Well now," he drawled, "ain't this something festive?" Vega stiffened. Pike saw it, smiled. "Ma'am," he said, "heard you been settling in at Carrow's place. Lot of folks got opinions about that." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Pike tapped the counter. "Gable, you missing a watch? Thought I saw one right by her hand." Jonah stepped forward, but Pike moved faster, grabbing Vega's wrist, twisting it hard enough to make Rosa cry out. "Let go," Vega hissed. "Just doing my duty," Pike said, louder for the room to hear. "Filthy thieves always run to the same ranches for shelter." Rosa lunged, small fists pounding Pike's leg. "Kid!" Pike snarled, kicking her off. Jonah saw red, but he held still long enough to see what Gable would do. Gable did nothing. Pike dragged Vega toward the door, announcing, "I'll have her in the cell till we sort this out. Maybe longer." They shoved her into the tiny jail across the street. The iron door clanged shut. Dust drifted from the ceiling with the impact. Rosa sobbed into her blanket. Jonah walked across the street with the slow, deliberate gait of a man who'd buried too much grief to fear any more of it. He didn't shout, didn't draw. He just looked, straight through the bars, straight at Vega, at the bruise forming on her wrist, at the worn collar that hid what the town refused to admit men had carved into her skin. "I'm fine, sir," she whispered. "Just go." He didn't. Truth is, I've seen better men walk away, and I never forgave them for it. Jonah turned to Pike. His voice was quiet, the kind you hear in church right before confession turns into warning. "Deputy, release her." Pike smirked. "Pay the fine." Jonah pulled a small leather pouch from his coat. He tossed it onto the desk. Gold coins spilled across the wood like a second sunrise. That enough? Pike hesitated. Greed warred with pride. Greed won. The cell creaked open. Vega stepped out, holding Rosa's hand. Someone on the street muttered, "Carrow's paying good money for his comfort these days." Jonah didn't ask who. He just acted. One punch, a clean one. The kind a man throws only after he's prayed not to. The heckler dropped into the dust, nose bleeding, teeth scattering like seeds in winter soil. Silence rippled through the street. Jonah stood there, breath steady, eyes on the man who'd insulted Vega. Not because she needed defending, but because truth demanded a witness. Vega touched his arm lightly. "Sir, don't." But he had already made his choice. By evening, the story would twist through Canyon Mesa like a spark in dry grass. The rancher who wouldn't look away. The woman the town wanted invisible. And the fury that began the moment he stood at her side. The wind had turned cold again. Sharp, needling cold that crept into boards, boots, and bone. Jonah felt it in the hinges of the barn, in the troughs half-frozen at dawn. Felt it in the silence of the men who'd stayed after rumors about Canyon Mesa spread. By Christmas week, half the ranch hands were gone. "Boss," Caleb muttered, hauling a bale of hay. "Folks think you're inviting trouble. Town says Kane's watching you." Jonah tightened the cinch on a saddle. "Town's been watching me since I buried my wife." Caleb said nothing. Some wounds weren't meant to be touched. Rosa fed Lirio in the corner, humming a tune barely above a whisper. Vega checked the horse's leg, still swollen but healing. She moved with purpose, never rushing, never wasting breath. Her presence steadied the barn the way a hymn steadies a chapel. Then the first sabotage came. It started small, a cut fence line on the north pasture. Clean, precise, the kind a man makes when he wants cattle scattered but not stolen. Jonah found the tracks at dawn, boot prints, 2 sets, heading back toward Canyon Mesa. He didn't curse, didn't chase. Men who cut fences wanted fear more than cattle. But then, the second hit came that night. The windmill pipe was twisted out of place, bent backward like a neck after a bad fall. It would take days to fix. The well would run low by morning. Water was the ranch's spine. Break it, and everything collapsed. Caleb spat into the dust. Kane's making good on his promise. Jonah wiped sand from his face. Kane doesn't promise, he warns. Truth is, I'd seen the same pattern after the war. Before bullets came the whispers. Before fires came the small destructions men pretended didn't matter. By the 3rd day, 2 hands quit. Packed before sunrise, didn't look Jonah in the eye. Vega didn't ask questions. She just worked harder. Rosa shadowed her everywhere, carrying rope, filling buckets, learning too young what it meant to live in a place the world wanted gone. Jonah watched them from the porch that evening. Vega's shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing the faint edges of the scar she kept hidden. Rosa braided hay with her small fingers. Thunder grazed nearby, calm under her mother's voice. They looked like a family shaped by hardship more than choice. Then Reverend Whitlock came. A carriage rolled up the road, too polished for ranch dust. Whitlock stepped down with Gable and the banker beside him. Their fancy coats looked wrong against the dying land. "Jonah," Whitlock said, nodding with the slow grace of a man who believed God lived exclusively on his side of town. "We come to offer peace." Peace. Jonah had learned long ago that peace from certain men carried the smell of rope. Whitlock opened his Bible, the page already marked. The good Lord teaches us not to give the devil a foothold. Folks say you've taken in a woman of questionable past. Child or no child. Vega froze mid-step by the barn door. Whitlock continued, voice syrup sweet. A ranch cannot carry sin and expect blessing. Christmas is coming, Jonah. Release the woman and the child. We will help you sell the land, fairly, honorably. You'll leave with dignity. Jonah stared at him, at Gable's smug little smirk, at the banker's gold watch glinting like temptation. Then he looked past them, at Rosa's small frame behind Vega's legs, at Vega's hand tightening around the bucket handle, at Thunder lifting his head, sensing tension like an omen. Jonah stepped off the porch. No, he said. Whitlock blinked. No. No, Reverend. The ranch carries sin only when men like you walk on it. A gust of wind hit, cold, fierce, scattering dust across their polished boots. Gable turned red. Folks will talk, Carrow. Let 'em, Jonah said. Whitlock's smile thinned. You're isolating yourself from the community. Jonah's jaw tightened. I didn't know we still had one. The men left in a huff, their carriage wheels spitting dust. Vega approached slowly. You shouldn't have done that, sir. He looked at her, really looked, at the tired eyes, the scar hidden beneath her collar, the weight she carried like an extra limb. This ranch was dying before you got here, Jonah said. At least now it has a reason to fight. The windmill whined in the distance. A church bell rang faint across the valley. Christmas coming fast, carrying judgment with it. Before the week was out, the fire they feared would stop being a whisper and become flame. Morning broke with a hard frost, thin ice edging the water troughs, glittering like brittle glass. Christmas Eve approaching, but the land didn't feel holy. It felt watched. Jonah gathered the remaining hands in the yard. Men stood with collars up, breaths fogging the air, waiting for orders the way tired soldiers wait for bad news. Thunder stomped behind the corral fence, agitated. The storm had changed him, or maybe Vega had. Rosa lingered near the barn, holding Lirio's halter, eyes sharp despite the cold. Jonah stepped into the center of the yard. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. A lot of men have left, he said. The work hasn't. No one spoke. Caleb shifted his weight, jaw clenched. Jonah turned to Vega, who hadn't asked for this, hadn't prepared for it, and stood there with one hand wrapped in cloth from the fire that took part of the winter feed. From today, Jonah said, the woman here, Mrs. Vega, will act as trail boss. Horse lines, night watch, boundary checks. Her word count same as mine. The yard fell dead quiet. Then, you're joking. Caleb stepped forward, disbelief burning in his voice. Boss, she ain't even... Jonah looked at him once. Just once. It was enough. Caleb swallowed whatever came next. Vega didn't move at first. Didn't breathe either. She stood like someone who'd been thrown a blessing and a burden in the same hand. Sir, she said quietly, you don't owe me. This ranch owes the truth, Jonah replied. You're the only one keeping it alive. Truth is, I hadn't meant to lift her up. I just couldn't stand watching the world push her down. Vega's eyes flicked across the men, measuring fear, suspicion, resentment. She'd seen those looks before in other towns, other lives, but this time she didn't lower her gaze. She stepped forward. All right, she said. Thunder, Muley, and the roans need rotation. 2 men on the north fence, 1 on watch at sundown, and no one rides alone. Her voice wasn't loud, but something about it carried. like a hymn sung through clenched teeth. Caleb muttered, "Town ain't gonna like this." "Town already made up its mind," Jonah said. He meant it, and Town proved him right within hours. By noon, the rumors had ridden into Canyon Mesa faster than any horse. Carrow put a Mexican woman in charge. Next thing you know, he'll let her sign the payroll. He's lost his mind since his wife died. Trail boss? With that past? With that scar? The scar. Always the scar. Scar over truth. Scar over history. Scar over a wound the town pretended wasn't carved by hands that still lived among them. At Gable's store, women whispered over flour bins. At the saloon, men spat tobacco between insults. At the church, Whitlock folded his Bible slowly, as if he'd just found a verse that confirmed everything he already believed. None of them had seen Vega hold the line in a dust storm. None had watched her tame a horse with nothing but breath and nerve. None had been there when she walked out of Pike's jail without bowing her head. But they talked like they owned her story. Late afternoon, Jonah found Vega in the tack room. She sat alone on a crate, staring at the new schedule she'd pinned to the wall. Her handwriting was neat. Sharp strokes, purposeful curves. A worker's script, not a dreamer's. Rosa slept curled up beside a saddle blanket, exhausted from morning chores. "You all right, ma'am?" Jonah asked. Vega didn't look up. "Never been anyone's boss before." "You earned it." She shrugged, a small bitter smile tugging her lips. Men earn titles. Women survive them. Jonah leaned against the doorframe. "Town will hit back." "I know." "They'll aim at you first." "I know." He waited for fear to show in her eyes. It didn't. Only fatigue. Only resolve carved from something older than this land. Vega touched her bandaged hand. "Sir, why'd you pick me?" Jonah hesitated. Only a beat. "Because you don't lie to yourself, or to a horse, or to me." For the first time since he met her, Vega's expression softened, barely. A crack in armor forged through pain. Outside, a cold wind rattled the stable door. Somewhere in town, a church bell rang for evening prayer. But the ranch felt far from grace tonight. Before the week was out, Cain would hear the news, and the fire he'd been nursing in secret would finally catch flame. The wind changed at sundown. Not a strong wind, just a sly one. The kind that sneaks under doors and asks the wrong questions. Jonah felt it first. He'd lived through enough winters to know when the night carried more than cold. The cattle were restless. Thunder paced the corral, ears pricked, snorting once at the empty dark. "Strange night," Caleb muttered. "Strange week," Jonah answered. Truth is, danger always walks in silence right before Christmas. Jonah finished checking the north paddock and headed toward the barn. Vega and Rosa were still inside, cleaning tack by lamplight, their shadows moving across the boards like two worn angels no one had prayed for. Then Rosa froze. "Ma'am," she whispered, "do you smell that?" Vega lifted her head. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but in recognition. Smoke. Not cook-fire smoke. Dry hay smoke. Jonah ran before anyone spoke. He rounded the corner just as the far hayloft bloomed orange. Quiet at first, like a match cupped in someone's hand. Then the flames leapt, licking up the rafters with greedy tongues. "Fire!" Jonah roared. The ranch exploded into motion. Caleb sprinted for water buckets. Two hands dashed for the pump. Thunder reared and slammed his hooves against the gate. Sparks rained from the roof like devil's snow. Vega didn't hesitate. She grabbed Rosa's shoulders. "Stay by the trough. Don't move." Then she vanished into the smoke. "Vega!" Jonah shouted, but she was already inside the inferno. He followed, coat over mouth, eyes burning. The heat hit like a punch. Light and shadow flickered over beams, over the bodies of panicked horses crashing against stalls. Vega stood in the middle of it all, voice low, steady. Easy, easy now. Follow me. She held one hand out, the other gripping a lead rope. One by one, the horses obeyed, driven by something Jonah couldn't name. Faith, maybe. Not the church kind. The kind people learn in chains. A beam cracked overhead. Vega shoved the last mare through the smoke just as a burning rafter came down. Jonah lunged, yanked her back by the arm. The falling timber caught her shoulder anyway, searing flesh. She didn't cry out. She just stumbled, then steadied. Outside, the ranch hands doused her with water, steam rising off her sleeve like a soul leaving skin. Jonah caught her before she fell. "You're burned," he said. "I'll heal." Her voice was too calm. The barn collapsed behind them with a roar that shook the ground. Winter feed, gone. Half the roof, gone. Hope, dimmed. Rosa ran to her mother, sobbing into Vega's coat. Jonah stood there in the firelight, breath ragged, ash sticking to his face. He'd seen loss before, but this felt aimed, and it was. The fire died before dawn. Smoke hovered over the ranch like a funeral shroud. Vega sat on a stool near the porch, shoulder bandaged, Rosa asleep on her lap. She stared at the ruin the way people stare at graves, quietly, without wishing for resurrection. Jonah stepped inside the house, opened his safe, took out every bill he had left, took out paper, ink, his old seal. For a long moment, he just sat there, thumb pressed to the page. "I've kept too many people by asking them to stay. This time, I'll free her by letting her go." When he returned outside, the sky was paling behind the mountains. Thin, cold, holy in a way the world didn't deserve. "Ma'am," Jonah said. Vega looked up. She saw the envelope. She didn't blink. "This is 6 months' pay," Jonah said. "Cash, and a letter. Says you're the best horsewoman in this territory. Any ranch will hire you." Vega didn't speak. "If you leave before sundown," Jonah went on, "Kane won't track you. Town won't touch you. You and the child can start somewhere clean." Rosa stirred, clutching her mother's sleeve. Vega's jaw tightened, not at the offer, but at the mercy behind it. Mercy hurts more than cruelty when you're not used to it. "Sir," she whispered, "are you firing me?" Jonah shook his head. "No, ma'am, I'm setting you free." The wind moved then, lightly, carrying the last trace of smoke over the yard. Horses nickered softly, unsure of a world that had lost half its shelter overnight. Vega stared at the letter, at the money, at the man offering both without asking anything in return. Her hand trembled once, just once. Rosa's small fingers closed over hers. The sun broke over the ruined barn. Before the day was out, her choice would change the direction of every life on that ranch, even Jonah's. Vega chose to leave at sundown. Not quickly, not tearfully, just purposefully. The way a person steps back from a life they were never supposed to survive in the first place. Jonah saddled 2 horses, his roan and the gelding Rosa could manage. He didn't argue when Vega said she'd ride through Calico Pass. It was the fastest way to the rail depot. Fastest, not safest. "Sir," Vega said quietly, "you don't need to escort us." Jonah adjusted the cinch. "Ma'am, the pass is rough." Rosa clung to her mother's coat. She didn't speak. Children rarely do when they're torn between hope and fear. Jonah mounted. Vega followed, stiff from her burn, but refusing help. They rode out under a winter moon that looked more like bone than light. Truth is, I'd prayed she'd stay. But prayers aren't commands. They're confessions whispered upward, hoping God still listens to broken men. The pass narrowed halfway up the ridge. Sheer rock on one side, drop off on the other. Wind carrying the smell of pine and something sharper, gun oil. Jonah slowed. Vega's hand drifted toward the rope on her saddle horn. Rosa whispered, "Ma'am?" Then the shot cracked. The gelding reared. Rosa screamed. Jonah grabbed the reins, swinging his horse sideways to shield them as another bullet sparked off the rocks. Shadows moved along the outcroppings. 3, maybe 4 men. "Cain's boys," Jonah muttered. "Get down." Vega dropped from the saddle, pulling Rosa tight against the cliff wall. Jonah drew and fired once, just enough to pin the shooters down. He wasn't trying to kill. Not yet. But they were. A rock shattered. Dust filled the air. Hooves screamed against stone. Vega scanned the ridge, eyes sharp as a hawk's in the gloom. "Sir, up there!" Jonah turned just as a man crept around the ledge, shotgun raised. Vega didn't freeze. She lunged, grabbing the man's wrist, twisting hard. The shot fired harmlessly into the sky. She slammed him into the rock with a strength born from too many years of surviving by inches. Rosa held her hands over her ears. Jonah dragged Vega back as another shooter rushed the trail. Jonah fired once, clean into the man's leg. He went down, howling. The remaining 2 fled into the trees. Silence fell. Not peaceful, just the kind that appears right after death changes its mind. Vega's breath shook. She checked Rosa, checked the horses, checked the gun she'd knocked from the man's grip. "Ma'am," Jonah said, "you hurt?" "Not tonight." But her bandaged shoulder was bleeding again. Jonah didn't mention it. Some truths weigh more when spoken aloud. They made it to the depot town by midnight. Most places had shuttered for Christmas Eve. Lanterns glowed in windows. Distant hymns drifted from the chapel, thin, nearly lost in the wind. The only lodging open was a narrow, crooked-roof boarding house run by a widow with round glasses and a temper-like burnt coffee. "1 room left," she said. "1 bed. Take it or freeze outside." Vega stiffened. Rosa leaned into her side. Jonah felt the weight of the night pressing on all 3 of them. "We'll take it," he said. The room was small, too small. A single iron bed, 1 wool blanket, a cracked wash basin. Vega set Rosa on the bed. "Lie down, mi cielo." Jonah turned to leave. "I'll sleep in the hall." "No," Vega said softly. "Hall's colder than the pass." She gestured toward the bed. "Rosa sleeps against the wall. You take the other edge. I'll sit in the chair." "You need rest, ma'am." "I'll rest when she's safe." He wanted to argue, wanted to insist she take the bed. But something in her face said she'd fought too many battles to be carried into comfort now. Jonah sat on the edge of the bed, boots still on, staring at the flickering oil lamp. Vega removed her coat. The bandage at her shoulder glowed faintly pink through the fabric. "Let me look at it," Jonah said. "I'm fine." "Ma'am?" She hesitated, then nodded once. He unwrapped the cloth gently, too gently for a man who spent years breaking ice from troughs and bone from frozen earth. The burn was angry, raw. "It'll scar," he murmured. Her voice barely rose above the lamp's hiss. "Everything does." Jonah met her eyes then. Dark, steady, tired. The eyes of a woman who expected nothing and learned to survive on less. For a breath, for a heartbeat, for 1 blink of God's mercy. The air between them shifted. Vega stepped back first. "You saved us," she said. You saved yourself, Jonah replied. I just held the line. Truth is, I wanted to touch her hand, not out of desire, out of recognition. But he didn't. He rose, lay on the far edge of the bed, facing the wall. Vega sat in the chair, shotgun across her legs, eyes never closing. Rosa breathed softly between them. Outside, Christmas hymns rose again, thin, hopeful, cracked like the world they lived in. Before morning came, someone would track the ambush back to Carrow Ranch, and the fire Cano had kindled would finally roar. They reached the ranch at first light. Frost clung to the rails. Smoke drifted low over the bunkhouse. The place looked quiet, too quiet. Caleb met them at the yard gate, face pale, hat in hand. Boss, we had visitors? Jonah dismounted slowly. Who? Sheriff's men, Whitlock, Banker Hale, and Pike. Caleb hesitated. They searched your house, your barn, every stall. Rosa hid behind her mother. Vega didn't move. Only her jaw tightened. Caleb swallowed hard. They left papers on your table. Jonah stepped into the house, boots scraping the floor. The air still smelled of strangers, sweat, dust, cheap cologne, the stink of authority misused. A folded sheet lay under a Bible on the table. A warrant. Not for Vega, for him. Harboring a fugitive, obstructing the law, endangering the community. The words stared back at him like a sermon carved into stone. Thing is, I'd been accused before, but never by a whole town wearing its Sunday face. Vega hovered by the doorway. What does it say, sir? That I'm guilty, Jonah said quietly, of protecting you. Rosa's small hand slipped into Vega's. The child understood more than she should. A knock cracked the silence. Pike strode in without waiting. Hat tipped back, badge crooked on his vest like a lie gone uncorrected. Carrow, Pike drawled. You're coming with me. Judge wants words. Jonah didn't answer. Pike glanced at Vega and sneered. You too, ma'am. Folks say you brought trouble on this ranch. Vega didn't flinch. Sir, I've brought nothing but work. Work? Pike barked a laugh. You brought fire. You brought thieves. You brought sin to a man who should have known better. Jonah stepped forward, voice low. Watch yourself. Pike's smile thinned. I don't take orders from a man harboring criminals. Caleb entered behind them, fists clenched. Two ranch hands hovered near the porch steps, ready to fight, but too scared to start. Whitlock appeared then, Bible in one hand, self-righteousness in the other. Jonah, he said warmly, the community simply needs assurance. Bring the woman to town. Let the court hear her story. She already has a story, Jonah said. You just don't like the chapters. Whitlock sighed, disappointed like a preacher whose favorite sinner just refused repentance. Son, you're letting sympathy cloud judgment. Sympathy? Jonah stepped closer. Is that what you call pulling a mother out of my barn by force? Tearing my house apart in the name of God? Whitlock didn't blink. You've taken in someone marked by violence, scarred by it, branded, some say. Vega stiffened, not at the words, but at the many hands behind them. Jonah's voice stayed flat. If a scar makes a person guilty, Reverend, half this valley belongs in chains. Whitlock closed his Bible. Bring her to town, or we'll assume you're hiding worse than a scar. Jonah looked at Vega then, really looked, at the burn on her shoulder, the rawness in her eyes, the child clutching her coat. He didn't want to give her to them, didn't want to parade her in front of men who'd already judged her. But he knew something worse. If he refused, Cain's men would return with more than warrants. Fire, rope, Guns, the kind they'd used on men like Jonah's father, on women like Vega. Jonah exhaled slowly. "Ma'am," he said, "we're going to town." Rosa shook her head. "No. No, ma'am, don't go." Vega knelt, touched the girl's cheek. "It's all right, Michielo. Some things must be faced." "But they're mean," Rosa whispered. Vega's voice softened, barely. "Kindness means more when the world isn't." Jonah offered his hand to Vega, not as a command, as a promise. She hesitated, then took it. Pike smirked. "Sweet. Ain't that sweet?" Jonah turned to him. "If another word leaves your mouth, deputy, I'll put you in the dirt before Sunday service, and the reverend here can pray you back out." Pike shut up. They rode into Canyon Mesa under a sky too bright for the dread beneath it. People stopped in the streets. Women at the church steps paused mid-hymn. Shopkeepers stared over half-open doors. Whitlock led them toward the courthouse. Pike strutted behind like he'd already won. Jonah kept his horse close to Vega's. Rosa sat between them, small hands gripping the saddle horn. Just before they reached the square, Vega whispered without looking at him, "Sir, if they ask, don't defend me." Jonah turned, startled. "Why?" "Because," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers, "truth sounds different when a woman speaks it herself. Truth is, I'd never admired her more than in that moment." They entered the square, and the town, hungry for a spectacle, leaned forward as if God himself were about to pass judgment. The courthouse smelled of pine polish and old winters. Jonah stepped inside first. Vega followed, Rosa between them like a flicker of breath in a storm too big for children. People packed the benches, shoulder to shoulder, Sunday clothes, Christmas ribbons still pinned on hats. The season of forgiveness, used mostly for judging. Whitlock took the front pew, Bible open like a blade. Gable sat beside Kane's lawyer. Deputy Pike lounged by the door, smug as a hanging rope just waiting for a neck. Jonah guided Vega to the defendant's table. She didn't look left or right. She walked as if every eye in the room weighed more than the irons she once wore. The judge cleared his throat. Canyon Mesa versus Jonah Carrow, on the charge of harboring a dangerous vagrant, obstructing lawmen, and endangering the community's peace. Jonah felt Vega's breath shift. She wasn't trembling. She was bracing, quietly, like a horse that's learned what a whip sounds like in the dark. Kane rose first. His suit shone blacker than any outlaw's hat, rings catching light like cold teeth. "Your Honor," he began, "our town has done its Christian duty, but charity must not become recklessness. The woman Mr. Carrow shelters is tied to violent histories, branded, some say, marked." A rustle crawled across the benches. Women leaned away. Men stiffened as if guilt could transfer through air. Kane smiled, thin, practiced. "There are things a decent town shouldn't look at, and there are things a decent man shouldn't invite into his home." He turned slowly toward Vega. "Some scars," he murmured. "Tell stories best forgotten. Don't look there, folks. It'll ruin your supper." Soft laughter rippled. Not cruel. Worse. Comfortable. Jonah's jaw locked, his hand curled on the table. "Truth is, I've killed men for less than that." The judge nodded toward Jonah's lawyer, Hart, a small man with tired eyes but steel bones. "Mr. Hart, your witness." Hart didn't stand right away. He looked at Vega carefully, as if asking permission without speaking. Then he rose. "This town," Hart said, "has heard one side of a story, a side scrubbed clean with money. Let's hear another." He turned to Vega. Ma'am, would you tell the court what happened to your land? Kane tisked loudly. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. We are not here for her history. Hart didn't move, and yet her history is all they're using to condemn her. The judge hesitated. The room waited. Finally, a nod. Proceed. Hart stepped back. Vega stood. It was quiet enough to hear Rosa's small gasp. Vega didn't speak at first. She reached for the top button of her shirt, unfastened it, then the next. A murmur spread like wind through dry grass. She pulled the collar aside. The scar shone white against her skin, twisted, raised, ugly as truth unburied. Not a thin line, not a knife mark. A burn, a brand. Pike swore, softly. Whitlock fumbled his Bible. Even the judge leaned forward. Vega's voice didn't shake. This, she said, touching the scar, was given to me while men laughed, while they prayed over the land they stole, while they said a woman like me should not own soil in a valley meant for better people. She let them look, didn't hide, didn't flinch. My father refused to sell our farm. They came at night. They tied me to the stall. They heated iron in our own fire. A woman in the benches sobbed quietly. I was 17. I was promised protection by men who wore suits like his. Her eyes flicked to Khan. Not accusing, just naming. Don't look there, Vega whispered. That's what they told me. Don't look at what they're doing. Don't scream. Don't remember. She looked at Jonah then, just for a breath. And this rancher, he didn't look away. The room stilled. Hart stepped forward, holding the old land grant Jonah had carried from Silverton. Your Honor, the original deed, written in Spanish, shows her family's claim was lawful. The water rights Kane claims were never his. Gasps, anger, whispers tearing through the benches like hail. Kane surged to his feet. Lies. But Jonah rose too. Sit down, he said quietly. And somehow Kane did. The judge slammed his gavel for silence. This court, he said slowly, will recess until I examine these documents. Pike pushed off the wall. Judge, you can't just... Deputy, the judge growled. Another word, and you will be the one in contempt. Pike shut his mouth. Vega lifted Rosa into her arms. The child buried her face in her mother's shoulder. Jonah watched them, a weight closing around his chest. Before Christmas ends. I knew this fight would cost us blood. They stepped into the cold daylight. Behind them, Canyon Mesa, its lies exposed, finally understood what it had forced a woman to show. When Jonah stepped out of the courthouse, the wind had teeth. Dry, mean. A kind of wind that carried judgment better than sound. Vega walked beside him, Rosa in her arms. The child's fingers clutched the woman's collar, as if afraid the world might tear her loose again. People spilled down the steps after them, whispers turning into waves, some shocked, some ashamed, some angry that truth had clawed its way out where everyone could see it. Truth is, a town doesn't change in a day. It just runs out of places to hide. Deputy Pike shoved through the crowd. His badge hung crooked, like it knew where this was going. Carrow, he barked. Vega, you're both under arrest for disrupting court proceedings and inciting disorder. Jonah didn't touch his gun. He didn't move at all. He was too busy watching Pike's hand, the way it twitched near his holster. Vega shifted Rosa to her other hip. No fear in her face. Just that quiet steadiness she'd worn in the courthouse when she showed the world the scar they gave her. Pike grabbed Vega's arm, The crowd inhaled sharply. Rosa bit him. She sank her teeth deep, like a wild thing fighting for the only mother she had left. Pike howled, yanking his arm back, ready to strike the child. Jonah stepped forward. One step. That was all. But then, a voice cut through the street. "Touch that girl and you answer to all of us!" Tomas Herrera limped into view, rifle slung across his chest, eyes bright with something older than fear. A man who'd lost land, family, and every illusion he'd ever held about justice. Behind him came miners, ranch hands, widows with cracked hands from years of washing clothes that weren't theirs. The people Kane's money had pushed to the valley's edges. Pike blinked. "This ain't your fight." Herrera spat in the dirt. "It became my fight the night you burned my barn." Gasps tore through the crowd. Some had known. Most had only guessed. Whitlock clutched his Bible as if it were a shield. Gable shrank behind Kane's lawyer. Kane himself stepped onto the landing, jaw tight, eyes calculating. He could feel the town leaning, just a little, away from him. He snapped his fingers. 2 hired guns detached from the crowd like wolves from brush. Their coats hung heavy. Their steps were too quiet. Their eyes too sharp. Jonah saw them fan out. One to the left, one to the right. He knew that pattern. He'd seen it before at funerals that didn't need flowers. "Inez," he murmured, barely turning his head. "Hold tight." Vega shifted, body shielding Rosa. Her free hand slid toward the small revolver at her belt. The first gunman lifted his pistol. A glint of sun flashed from the barrel. People screamed. Too late. The shot cracked, but the bullet never reached its mark. Something small and white flew through the air. A stone, a piece of chalk, thrown with every ounce of a child's fear and fury. It struck the gunman's wrist, just enough to pull his aim. The bullet tore into the dirt inches from Jonah's boot. Rosa, eyes wide, still clutching the second chalk piece she always kept in her pocket. Before the gunman could adjust his shot, Hart, quiet little Hart, fired from the courthouse doorway. One clean shot, straight into the man's leg. He went down hard. The second gunman froze, realizing suddenly he was the only wolf left in a field full of hunters, and the hunters were tired. "Drop it," Jonah said softly. The man did. Kane turned to run, but the townsfolk closed in, a slow, tightening ring. Whitlock stepped back from him. Gable pretended not to know him. Even Pike hesitated. Money could buy silence. It could buy fear. But not after a woman has shown the world the scars you gave her. Kane's voice cracked. "You people don't know what you're doing." Herrera raised his rifle, not to shoot, but to point. "We're finally looking," he said. That's all. Jonah felt something inside him shift, like a rope that had been tight for too many years finally loosening. I knew this day would come. Just didn't know if I'd be alive to see it. He turned to Vega. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded once, and together with Rosa between them, they walked through a town that had run out of excuses. The first snow came late that winter. Thin, hesitant. Like even the sky wasn't sure Canyon Mesa deserved a clean slate. Jonah waited on the porch while the lawyer's horse trotted up the road. Elias Hart bundled tight in a coat 10 years too thin for the season. The man dismounted stiffly and handed Jonah a sealed envelope tied with courthouse ribbon. "Judge signed it yesterday," Hart said. "Land grant confirmed, water rights returned, Kane's appeals thrown out." Jonah exhaled once, the kind of breath a man takes after carrying a body for too many miles. Hart hesitated. "There's something else." He handed a smaller envelope to Vega. Her hands didn't shake, but the paper trembled anyway. Jonah watched her open it, watched the light catch the black ink inside. A deed, stamped and notarized. 50% ownership of Carrow Ranch, transferred to Inez Vega and her rightful heir, Rosa Vega. The yard went quiet. Even the wind stilled as if it too was waiting for her reaction. Vega stared at the page a long time, not breathing, not blinking. Rosa tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, does it say we can stay?" Vega knelt, pulling the girl close. Her forehead touched Rosa's hair. And for once, just once, her voice broke. "It says no one can take this from us again." Jonah swallowed hard against something sharp in his chest. Truth is, I needed them more than they ever needed me. When Vega finally stood, she met Jonah's eyes. Not grateful, not indebted, equal. "You've tied your life to ours," she said softly. Jonah shook his head. "No, I just wrote down what had already been true." Hart cleared his throat, pretending not to watch the way they looked at each other. He mounted his horse and tipped his hat. "Try not to burn the place down," he said. "I'm getting too old for more trials." He rode off, snow swirling behind him. They saddled up at first light. Rosa climbed onto Lirio's back, a little taller, a little steadier than before. Her chalk rock hung from a leather string around her neck now, a badge of a battle she'd helped win. Vega mounted Thunder, the once wild stallion she had gentled with nothing but a song and a scarred hand. Jonah swung onto his old black gelding, joints creaking louder than the saddle. They rode out along the fence line. The same fencemen had cut, burned, poisoned, and claimed. The same fence Jonah once thought he'd die defending alone. Snow dusted their hats. The land stretched quiet and raw beneath the pale winter sun. They stopped where the northern boundary met the dry creek, a place Jonah had stood years ago, burying hopes he never thought would breathe again. Rosa pointed. "The post is broken." Vega swung down first, hammer in hand, before Jonah even reached the ground. She drove the new wooden stake deep, each strike clean, sure, final. Jonah handed her the wire. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away. Some things God fixes through miracles, some through storms, and some through people he sends limping to your gate on a day you thought you didn't need saving. By the time they reached the eastern ridge, the sun had climbed high, pale gold spreading over the valley like a benediction. Vega looked out across the land. "So this is home." Jonah nodded. "If winter kills us, it'll have to say our names proper first." Rosa laughed, a small, bright sound scattering into the cold air. She pressed her heels to Lirio's sides and trotted ahead, carving a trail through untouched snow. Vega watched the girl, eyes soft with a kind of hope she'd never dared carry. Jonah watched Vega, not as a man claiming, not as a man pitying, but as a man finally allowed to look and not told to turn away. The three of them rode on, side by side, across land once soaked in fear, toward a horizon washed clean by winter light. Not a perfect future, not an easy one, just a real one. A family, not born, but made, etched into the valley like new scripture, written slow, written hard, and written true. As winter settled over the valley and the last light drifted across the Carrow fence line, the story of Jonah, Inez, and little Rosa found a quieter place to rest. It wasn't a perfect ending. Few things in the West ever were. But it was a true one. A man who had carried too much grief found a reason to look forward again. A woman who had been told to hide her scars discovered a home where she no longer had to. And a child who once walked with fear learned, at last, what it felt like to belong. Out here, the land remembers every footstep, and sometimes it forgives. Maybe that's why their story lingers with us, because it reminds us that hope can return, no matter how many winters we've lived through. If this tale touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, or which part stayed with you the most. And if you'd like more Western journeys filled with courage, redemption, and second chances, please consider giving this video a like, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications.